let's just see how this is all coming about. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for hanging in there. Can anyone see me? Am I here? Am I here? I'm a little bit fuzzy, says Julia. I'm seeing myself kind of all right. YouTube's giving me all kinds of problematic messages. It says bad video settings and how dare you go live and all that sort of stuff. So I guess, yay, I still have hair, just about, yes. So thank you so much for sticking with me here. I'm not entirely sure how well we're gonna go today, but let's just try it. That's the only thing we can do. So I've noticed there's more than one thing wrong here. So YouTube, first of all, had this issue that when I schedule an event, I get a stream key, and then I put that into OBS and I send data, and YouTube then says, okay, we see you, you can preview the event, and then you have to press a play button, and then it says, okay, if you're happy, you can press another button, and then the internet can see you. That's the plan with scheduled events, so that you can go live a little bit beforehand and test your settings and see if everything is okay, and then you press a button and you go, boom, now everyone can see you. And today, I sent data, YouTube said, okay, that's fine, it's all good. Press the play button to synchronize your player, and then you can press the start streaming button. And I did that, press the play button, and then that was it. YouTube kind of just froze, and I couldn't press the go live button. And that was weird, because I tried then to use another browser, which didn't work, had the same issue. So I thought I'm going to try another browser on another computer, which also had that problem. So something with that scheduled event was not going well, and I thought, well, I'll just create a new event and do the go live now thing, and that's what we are now. That's why the URL changed. So I'm sorry about that. Probably lost about half my audience there, but hey, that's okay. We're still here. That's all that counts. So then the next thing that, of course, was wrong is that I've had a lot of fun building this new computer, the new Z800 workstation. And it's gone so well that I've even added the second RTX 2080 card into it, which is awesome. So I'll tell you that whole story as well. And everything went well, so I assumed streaming would work okay as well, but of course I didn't have time to test it until about an hour ago, when we just came out of covering another presentation. So it's kind of, in our local community center, my oncologist was speaking. He gave a little community talk, and I thought I'll drop by and with Julia we'll film this. And that was a bit delayed, so we only arrived back here at about 3:15, and there you go. But I still have hair, like you say. That's cool. Woohoo! That is always a good audio sign there. I love that. And in a moment, I'll find out what it is. This is cool. So what I had planned for you today is indeed a little animation, rendering a little animation. And that's the one I've posted earlier already onto YouTube, the little teaser trailer I've made from the 3D Shenanigans thing. So I thought I'm going to put a little teaser together, and I would love to share it with you right now. So here it goes, kind of the world premiere. It starts off with this. Let's look at this, and I'll talk you through what I did there. Thank you for those of you who've already seen it, Rod. Thank you so much. Let's have a look at it. Shenanigans, live every Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, only on the WP Guru. Unless something breaks. Which of course it did, which is why it's now just as smoky in here as we had left it last time. So it's kind of cool. That's the other thing, that I posted something on Patreon there. The fog assets, they're now available for my Patreon supporters. So download them and see what you can do with them. So there's a lot going on in this animation, and I want to talk you through how we can build this with Blender. And that's where the next problem, of course, comes in, that this modifier that I've used there, it's called the self-fracture modifier. You can use it on any object that you build with Blender, and that will split up your object into little pieces, and they're all clumped together at first, but then you can use physics to just have them all fall to the ground. And that's what I did there. But of course, that self-fracture modifier is not quite in Blender 2.8 yet. They're still working on it. From what I understand, it's something that's supposed to come to Blender 2.81 in about 3 to 5 months or so. They're focusing on getting Blender 2.80 stable now and releasing it in about June, July. And then 3 months after that, they want to bring out another version, which then has incremental improvements. And so that's kind of their roadmap. So it's a new development model that they've got. And so there we go. That's it. Exactly. Both graphics cards are generating a lot of heat here. That's exactly what it is. So let's watch this again, in fact, and just step through what's going on here. So I've animated basically only this part from here, from this logo. You can see the cracks in the logo here, and we're going to build the whole logo from scratch out of text elements. And we're going to put the shaders on, so I'll show you how that works as well. And then we will apply that self-fracture modifier to shatter these things into pieces. And then we can basically press one button and it'll do this. It'll go and animate all this for us, which is very nice. So in order then to do the first part of this whole thing, this is the same animation, but I've added a camera move there. So I've got two cameras in the scene. One is the one at the end, and the other one ends in the same position, but then goes and moves around all the shattered pieces there. So that's how I did that. Multiple cameras, and you can see, sometimes you can see in the yellow pieces here, they have another shader applied. So some of these have kind of dark gray outside inside pieces, and that's basically the inside of these pieces. I don't know why it didn't apply that to all the pieces, but just to the yellow ones, and they have an inside, and you can define an inside shader there as well. And if I remember how to do it, I'll show you how. So that makes this a little bit problematic, because we have to do this self-fracture thing in Blender 2.79, so that we're going to use the old interface for that, and then we're going to have to do the rendering in Blender 2.8, because 2.79 has an older version of CUDA, which means it doesn't quite use the RTX cards there, the RTX 2080 cards. It just says, no, I can't see a GPU there. There are special builds that you can use, and then you can basically build the new version of CUDA with the old Blender interface. I'm not quite that tech savvy, I must say, so I'm just using two versions of Blender. So there we go. Shall we get into it? Let's do this. In fact, let's watch this trailer one more time, because it is really cool. I'm very proud of it. There we go. "3D Shenanigans" live every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, only on the WP Guru. Unless something breaks. Well, the other thing, of course, I did was this video overlay there, the kind of all these distortions, and the kind of lifted off of a VHS tape, by the way. And that is something I'm going to release to Patreon supporters this coming week. I've used that in a trailer about September time, and that was something that I created for that project, and I thought that'll be good to use for all of us. So I'm going to release that to Patreon supporters later this week, or this coming week. Okay, so let's start with Blender 2.79 and say hello to the old interface, the one that we're saying goodbye to very soon. So that's this one here. And first of all, I think in here I'm going to go and build the whole logo there. The band project, that's the one. Oops, that's the one, Christina, exactly, the band project. Oh, really? That's interesting. That's interesting, Christina. Christina has a version of 2.79 with the CUDA support, with the new CUDA support. That's exciting. Send me the link. I'd love to try that, because this is such a cool modifier there. Before we do the logo, let me just try and show you this with the Blender default cube. It always comes in like this. So I'm going to go and lift it up a bit by saying GZ1, enter. And what I'm doing there is I'm basically making sure it just sits on the ground plane here, which it now does. The cube comes in with 2 heights of Blender unit, and if we lift it 1 up, then it's directly at the bottom there. Ah, thank you so much. Oh my God! And then would you build this yourself, Christina? Do you have to build Blender yourself for that, or is there a pre-compiled version available? I'm not much of a software builder myself, unless it's a one-click affair. So I'm going to divide this cube into these pieces in a moment. Currently, it doesn't have any geometry. If we do that, it literally has 8 points. That's all. So I'm going to go and bring in a plane as well. That'll be our floor. So Shift A does that. Shift A, and then bring in a plane. Hit the S key, and then we can scale this up so that this thing is just going to be a little bit larger there, and that should work. We can't apply this self-fracture modifier or this self-fracture thing on this cube, or we can, but it's not going to look very good because the cube itself or your object that you want to go to town with has to have more geometry. So I think what I'm first of all going to do is apply a modifier here, and that's happening. See if we can do that in the old interface. That's this little gear icon here. And funny actually about the new interface, old interface, I have a kind of a beta version and an alpha version of Blender on my Mac, and that has the new layout to it, but it has this thing on the right hand side. This is all the old Blender interface still, so it's a very mixed up version. It's kind of, I really got confused when I saw that. So the little gear icon, that's the modifiers. If we add a modifier, I believe I need to put the I forgot now, the Remesh modifier to it. Let me do that. Remesh modifier. Is it Remesh? Yes, it's Remesh, isn't it? No, it's a subdivide modifier. What am I talking about? There we go. Let's get rid of that. Let's have the subdivide modifier. Where is that? Is that not how I did it? Am I completely going crazy here? How do I subdivide a model again, Christina? How do I do that? Did I do that with what did I do that with? Oh my God, my brain's gone blank. So the computer's not working, YouTube's not working, my brain's not working. That's terrible. Edit mode, but then I'd have to do that individually. I thought I can just go and add this into. I thought I was going to do the Remesh modifier. Let me try that. Yeah, Remesh, that's what I was going to use. Remesh, perfect. With all the default trimmings here, that'll create a lot of geometry. Whew. My goodness, glad I could work it out. I'm going to apply that, and then with this little icon here, I can just display the wire. So there we go. We see this geometry now. It's increased on that cube. Whew. My God, good catch there. Crazy. I'm going to switch the wire off because we trust there's enough geometry in there. And where it gets interesting now is here on the left-hand side, the self-fracture button that's in the tool shelf. I believe if that isn't open, you can open it with the T button. That even works in the new Blender version. It's just a very different version of this tool shelf here. And I've got my thing here already. The tool, the self-fracture is a button on the left-hand side here. But to get that there, we need to activate this add-on. Blender ships with it. It's just not activated. So in the old version of Blender, I believe that's under File, and there's User Preferences. And if we click in that, we get to see this exciting window here. And there's a kind of a lot of stuff going in here, how you configure your interface. Under System, you can see the amount of graphics cards you have. Like I've got these 2 cards now. I'm going to tell you all about that story. Why do I have 2 cards? One is only temporary, and I need to send it back, sadly. So I don't get to keep it. I can activate or deactivate a couple here. One of those things. So, but what I want to go to is add-ons, and add-ons is a bit like plugins for WordPress. So add-ons in Blender is like plugins for WordPress. You can extend the functionality of Blender with people who have Python experience, who can write things in Python, who are amazing people who can, extend the functionality of Blender. And Blender ships with all these things that are grayed out. And if I wanted to add one, then I can just tick this thing here, like display tools. I can just tick that, and then display tools is now activated as soon as I hit save user settings. I don't actually know what display tools does, so I'm going to go and deactivate that again. And you can either go through this long list and find the add-ons you want. You can go into any of these categories here, so they're categorized, and you can enable anyone that you know, anything like camera, add camera rigs and all that. Or you just go to all, and then you search in this little box at the top. So what we need to search for is cell, and that'll go and activate the cell. That'll come up with the cell fracture thing, and you're just going to have to tick that box here. You can disclose it, and then it'll tell you who developed it. There's documentation, if there's a bug and all. This is another add-on here, the cell fracture crack it add-on that works in conjunction with this. Christina made me aware of that. I haven't actually looked at that yet, so you know, it's a good idea to maybe do that. I've seen a tutorial of somebody on YouTube there, very interesting stuff. You can make little trees out of cylinders and put little proper bark cracks in there. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to use the cell fracture thing, and then save user settings, and that is that. So then we can just close this window, and then this button will show up, and then this is where it really gets exciting. Then we can go and click it. When we click it, this massive menu comes up here, and that looks scary, but the good thing is we don't really need to worry much about this thing. There's only 2 items of interest here, and the first one is right at the top. So the own particles is selected, the button in the middle here, and source limit is in essence the amount of pieces your object is going to be shattered into. 100 will work fine. We can increase it, we can decrease it, we can play around with it. That's just one thing I wanted to make you aware of. And the other one is under mesh data here. It can give whatever the next side of the pieces are, like the inside of the pieces, where the cracks are. You can give that a separate material, and that is here. And that's the material. You need to actually give it the material ID, and that depends on the amount of materials you have. Currently we don't have any, but this is how we get the kind of inside material on the cracks. So I'm going to just click OK, and we'll see what happens. Something happens, and it's quite interesting, and there we go. Now we're back to that cube. I'm not entirely sure what happened there, because as far as I can tell, the cube does have no cracks. It's got the same geometry that I've created there with the Remesh modifier. And that's confusing, but if you know Blender, you know there's layers in Blender, and those are the little things at the bottom palette here. These have gone away in Blender 2.8. There's new things now. They're called collections, and they work similar to layers, but they're not exactly layers. So layers they're not like layers in Photoshop. They're basically the same spots in our 3D universe, just at alternating planes, if you know what I mean. That's the best way I can describe it. So you can click these little buttons here, and the second one has a tiny dot on it, and if I click on that, I can now see that my fractured cube with all its origins in places is now on the second layer. And I can now go and basically select any of these parts, and I can see that they're coming apart. It's very interesting stuff there. So this is my shattered cube. And of course, the way this is handled here, the way these cracks are happening here, they are completely random, so they're totally arbitrary. And the way these cracks are generated is with this outside object that comes and kind of visits our object before these cracks are made, and that is a Voronoi algorithm. So Voronoi is this kind of algorithm of splitting things up into these types of shapes. Blender has a lot of Voronoi stuff. If you ever wanted to create a kind of mosaic type picture that's completely random, then Voronoi is indeed the way to go. And that is how that works. It makes these things, it kind of cracks them up here. I'm going to go and select everything in layer 2 by just hitting A twice, and then I'm going to go hit X, and that'll delete everything on layer 2, because I want to do this again because I really like doing it, you know. So select the cube, move it over here, create that, click that cell fracture button, and then you've got all these options here. Maybe I'm going to increase the amounts a little bit here of the particles. Oops, sorry, that wasn't scale. It was supposed to be source limit. Maybe I'm going to try 200. And then I'm going to hit the OK button, and then we'll see this Voronoi thing go into work. Very exciting stuff. And the more complex your object is, the more pieces are being created. You can get really creative there. You can use the grease pencil to add things, like add points where something like a projectile would hit this, and then it would build cracks that are as if somebody had shot this thing, you know, with a gun. So very interesting stuff. Hello Reza, good to see you, good to meet you. I'm afraid I don't speak any French, so sorry about that. But hey, there we go. We're talking about shattering an object. So right now, all my pieces are on the second layer here. And in order to bring all these about to the first layer, I can just go and press the M button. I believe everything is selected. If not, just press the A button, press the A button again. So to select everything, press the M button, and then we get this little menu here that lets us move anything that's selected to another layer. I'm going to move that to the first layer, and now things on the second layer have completely disappeared. There we go. So on my first cube, which is still selected, I think I'm going to go and make that invisible. Or I can just move that away. I can just move that out of, you know, just out a little bit here. Yeah, maybe I'll just leave it here. And let's focus on this guy and see what happens if we now comes the complicated part. For me, that was the complicated part, to figure out how do I assign each of these things like what's it called? Physics. Turns out that this cell fracture add-on does that already for us, I believe, which is very exciting. So let me see if this works again. So you do that by going into the Blender game engine, which is also something that I've never done before. Let's try this. Go from Blender render. There's Blender render, there's cycles, and there's also Blender game. And as soon as we do that, as we click that, we're in some kind of other mode now. So it's the game mode. And I believe if I now click P, then I think this thing is going to fall into all its pieces onto the floor. Let's see. I can't promise anything. This may not work. Let's see. Looks like it's working just fine. Okay, this is good. And it depends on when these pieces are settling, so these are not quite, these are still falling down. Maybe if I shake my desk a little bit, maybe something else is going to happen. No, there we go. So that's shattering all these pieces. And now if you tried this and you try to click anything else, you'll find that Blender is unresponsive right now. And that's because I believe the physics are still being simulated and you can't do anything else. To get out of this mode, you can press the escape button, and then Blender is going to be back to normal. But also your whole cube is back in one shape, so it's maybe also not what we want. So once again, there's another exciting thing. This whole animation that's more or less been created there for us, we can record that onto the timeline, and that will allow us to basically save the file and go to any frame in our animation, and then we'll have an animation. And that's so super easy to do. I found that really exciting to see how easy Blender has implemented that. And the only thing we need to do is, in order to record our animations, we go over here under game, and there's this thing called record animation. And then if we tick that, just see it is definitely ticked, then we can just do the same thing, the whole thing again. So I'm going to just go press the P button, and now the physics are being simulated for the amount of frames I've defined in my animation. So I believe this is now longer than 250 frames. Sometimes it slows down, especially with very complicated objects here that have a lot of pieces. So sometimes it's just, it'll just take a while to settle. And 250 frames, which is the default duration of an animation, may not be enough for that. So I'll just leave it at 250. I'm going to press escape, and then we've got this. But now check it out. On the timeline here, I can now, with the right mouse button, mind you, can now scroll through this, and there's my animation on every keyframe. And that is very exciting. And I can go and play that back. Whoops, with the play button. May not be real time because it's all just a preview here, but once you render it, it'll be real time. And that's how I made that animation. That's how I made the physics, and I couldn't believe how super easy it was. And then the thumbnail, I believe I just went to the first or second image, and that just gives you that kind of effect there. I believe you're probably going to see this better with a matte cap on it. if I could find where that is. Let's find a matcap. Maybe this one. Yeah, maybe that makes it a little bit easier to see here. Yes, animation, timeline animation. I've just seen a tweet today and seen that the timeline is a bit of a weird thing in Blender. You have to right click and drag, no matter if you've set your click preference to left click. Everything is then left click except for the timeline. The timeline is always right click and drag. And it's still the case in Blender 2.8. So if ever you wanted to left click on the timeline and nothing happens, you're not mad. It's right click. And the thing is, I've read a tweet today that they're implementing left click and drag in Blender 2.8. So that's coming too. So it's very, very cool. I'm looking forward to that. It's almost like a real like an application that everyone else knows how to use. So there we go. I think so. Yes, Biscuits. Is it possible? Biscuits is asking, is it possible to shatter only a part of the object and make half shattered ruins? I think what you could probably do is you can divide your scene into several objects and only make sure you shatter certain objects. So like in our case, I'd have a cube and I've got a shattered cube. So I could say this is the shattered part of my scene and this is the unshattered part of my scene. You can do that. So it's it's a lovely thing to play around with, and we're going to do the whole thing again with my logo. So I'm going to create my logo from scratch now, and we'll see where that takes us. And we're going to apply this to 4 different parts then. Let's see how we can do that. So first of all, let's go and create a new scene. I think I don't want to keep this, so new scene, reload the startup file, and I don't think we need that cube anymore. So I'm going to hit X and delete it. And I'm going to start with text objects, in fact, and we're going to start building those, and we'll see if we can get some basic lighting going, and then we'll see where it goes from there. You're right, actually. Yes, right, Rod. That's exactly how that matcap looks. I feel this matcap reminds me of ZBrush. I must admit, ZBrush has a similar kind of look and feel to it, and that always reminds me of that. So let's go create a text object here. Christina's made a couple of very cool videos on her channel about text objects, so very cool. Check that out, about how you get the geometry nicely done there. So, check out Christina's channel for that. I'm going to start with 3D perhaps. There we go, 3D. And I'm going to go out of this. So that's just the text object here, and I want to make that look handsome, so I'll go over to the font menu, which is this little F icon here in the old interface. It's almost nice to say goodbye to the old interface this way, in a way. And over here on the bottom right, in fact, this is where we can set a font. So I don't know if the font that I'm using is called Days 1, and no matter how many times I've put it into my fonts directory, it just doesn't remain there. So I don't know why that is, but I think it's I've put it down here under Days 1. It's just a regular folder that I have shared across it. So I double click that, and that'll change the font of my font here. Change the font of my font. Excellent. So I'm going to go and turn that on its side. So I'm going to rotate this with RX90, and now it stands up, and I would like for that to be on the side, so that is now the y-axis. So I'm going to go RY90, the other way around, so RY minus 90, and that'll do that. Oops. That is very cool how Blender can do that. And that's really all I want to do with the 3D text. So that'll be one object. I think I can call that, let me just call that something. Call that 3D. Haha. Now I'm going to create the 3 types of words. So it's 3D shenanigans, and I think I'm going to start with gens because that's then on the bottom, and then I can leave that on the bottom and then move the other ones up. I think I'll start with she. Let's start with she. There we go. Shift A, create some text. Text comes in with this font again, but it's easy now that we've got it in Blender already. All I need to do is just click this font menu here, just select Days 1 regular, and that'll change the font. I'm going to go and turn that this way again, so that's RX90. R is always the kind of the shortcut for what you're doing, and then followed by the axis, followed by the amount of degrees you'd like to turn that. You can do that arbitrarily as well, but sometimes when it's defined objects, it's very easy to do it this way. Forgot to call that something, so I'm going to call that sh. And to move that up, I can either now use the widget here, or once you've learned the shortcuts, it's actually much easier to use those. So that'll be with the G command. R was rotate, G is grab. So G, and if I do that, it's completely arbitrary how I move that, but I can constrain this to an axis. So I want to move this up. Blender's up axis is the Z axis, blue is Z. So I can go and say G, Z, and then I can only move it up no matter what I do with my mouse. So I'm going to maybe put that here, perhaps leave that here, and we'll see what else happens. Shenanigans, we need a bit more space there, I guess, but we can worry about that later. So let's call that she, in fact. No matter what I do, my microphone is somehow always in the way. I can't quite see the keys on the keyboard sometimes, so maybe this is going to work. There, so sh, or she. Let's use another text object. Shift A to add an object. That's the same as using the add menu down here. You can do that as well, but that's once you get into these shortcuts, it's just very addictive and very fast to do that. So Shift A, text, and that'll be nanny. There we go. A tab is to get into the text edit mode. That's kind of edit mode, no matter if it's a text object or a vertex object. And once again, with that selected, we'll go over here to the font and just change it to days 1. And once again, we're going to rotate that R followed by the axis, which is the X-axis, the red axis, and it kind of highlights there as well, and followed by the amount of degrees, so 90. And that's that. Now we can lift it up again with G, Z, and just move it up. Yeah, I think the she needs to go G, Z, a little bit higher, I guess, like so. Totally flat. And the nanny, of course, needs to also be named. And now we need guns. So once again, Shift A, text, guns. Change that font over and go for RX90. And there we go. That's almost the logo. Perfect. Gans hasn't been named, so let's title that. And perhaps we're going to make the 3D a little bit bigger. I think before I do that, though, I think I'm going to go and apply that Solidify Modifier. So I can, it depends what I want to do, and I'd like for all these text objects to have a very kind of high polygon count so that they fall into thousands of pieces. So I think I'm going to leave the 3D as it is for now, and then I'll scale it a little bit later. I'll show you why in a moment. I think this is something that I wish I had done on the real animation, but I hadn't done that, so there we go. Solidify modifier, yes. So let's go over here to that little wrench icon and add the solidify modifier. And that'll give this thing, currently it's literally just a plain object here. So it's not even a plain object, it's a font object. And with the solidify, we can now make it thicker. We can also do that in the font menu, by the way, can't we? I think so. Oh, something's happening to Dion's stream. I can still see something, but you never know. We've had so many issues getting started. OBS is telling me no, it's still doing something, so that's good. Let me know if you can. Let me know if you guys can still see me. I can still see me back, but hey, you never know. You never know with this thing. Today is one of those days where I'm surprised we got this far already, even though it got a little bit late here. So pixelated, yeah. I guess I've got some bandwidth issues. So that's the other thing that went wrong today. I really can't tell you why. So bandwidth issues were weird because the new computer has has got more oomph than my old computer, but now the new computer's got these 2 graphic cards in there, and that's what I was going to show you exactly. That's what I was going to tell you about. Why do I have 2 graphics cards exactly? So let's talk about that quickly. My first RTX 2080 was working great, but due to some monitor input issues, I've ordered a really cheap adapter from DisplayPort to DVI, and that's the input that I'm usually using on my monitor. So that adapter was $7 and it worked perfectly fine until I wanted to take it out again. It was stuck. It was one of those adapters like HDMI, just goes and slots in and you take it back out, no problem at all. But this adapter, this DisplayPort to DVI adapter, that had like little metal hooks on the inside. And the moment I snuck it in, it wouldn't come out anymore. So the idea was that there was a button at the bottom of the DisplayPort thing that you press down and then you just go and slide it out. But that button was unpressable. So that was weird. So I thought, well, I'm not entirely sure what's up with that. So I thought maybe it's the plastic cover. Lifted the plastic cover, some metal plate underneath it. Metal plate, not pressable. Can't take the adapter out. Can't take the card out of the computer anymore. So I didn't know what to do. It just wouldn't come out. And I was thinking, well, I can't have a card with an adapter stuck in there because I can't take it out of the old computer, put it in the new computer. So I asked Amazon, what can we do about it? And they said, well, what would help? And I said, well, currently I probably have to destroy the adapter to get the card out of the whole thing. And they said, don't worry about the adapter. We'll give you a refund for that. And the card, well, we'll just send you a new card. Do what you have to do, basically. And I thought, oh my God. So I've destroyed the adapter. And Amazon have sent me a second card, and the first card is still working super fine. I've since managed to dislodge the adapter, and now I can. I've got for about another 2 weeks or so. I can try out what two RTX 2080s are going to be like, and that is currently what I'm doing. And it's crazy. I may have to get a second one, but not entirely sure how to afford that. Maybe I should start a Kickstarter campaign or something. Anyway, that's why I have two cards right now for the next week or two, and then we'll see what happens then. Back to this logo shenanigans thing here. So I have two options. I can either use a modifier to add solidification, I guess is the word I'm looking for, to my letters, or I can use the font menu. I think I'm just going to go with the Solidify Modifier. And I'm not entirely sure how thick I want this to be. I want this to be kind of substantial. So I'll just go and crank this up a little bit and say 2, maybe 4. Let's make it 4. That's it up here under thickness, Solidify Modifier thickness. I think I'm going to do that. So I just type in 4, that 0.4 rather, that's a little bit thick there. So, or maybe it's 0.5, let's do that, so 0.5, that makes them nice and chunky letters. That's cool. And I'm going to do that for every single object. I'm leaving them individual because then I can apply different shaders to it. So let's click this one here, she, add the Solidify modifier to it. Thickness 0.5. Boom. It's a little bit chunkier than I had it in the demo, but it doesn't matter. It's fine here. I'm going to click this one, do the same thing. Solidify 0.5. And then the last one on the bottom, solidify, oops, 0.5. There we go. That's what I was thinking, Rod. Enjoy it while you can. And that's exactly what I'm doing, which is why I wasn't able to make another episode of the lighting tutorial. That is, of course, coming up. It's in the works. How to use parametric lights in DAZ Studio. I've got good feedback on that from so many viewers. One of whom was suggesting, can I do the same with Blender, like basic lighting in Blender? And that sounds like a good idea. Maybe I'll do that. As soon as I'm done with the lighting for DAZ Studio, I may do that for Blender too. So that's the Solidify modifier applied. Let's see if we can scale up the 3D thing here. And I would like for that to not scale fully in its entirety. I'd like to constrain this to 2 axes only. So I don't want this to go into the green axis here. The green is the Y axis, and I can do that by using S. So S followed by my mouse means this thing scales completely. Overall, with escape I can always get out of that if I wanted to, but that also means it'll get deeper, it'll get wider to the back, and I don't want to do that. I'd like for this to literally just scale in the X and the Z axis and not in the Y axis. And Blender makes that possible by selecting the Shift axis, and then it'll exclude that axis. It's very, very clever there. So S followed by Shift Y, I believe, and now I've got two axes highlight, and if I now go and scale this, I can make the 3D as big as that. And just go click, and that'll now have left the depth alone. Is that a little bit too much? Was that a bit too big now? Maybe I'll make it a little bit smaller. What do you think? So S, Shift Y, and then I'll just make that a bit smaller. Just like that. Okay, that looks quite nice, I think. And once again, if we want to apply that terracotta matte cap, you press the N button. That brings up this shelf. I don't even know what it's called, but on the very bottom you find under shading you find matte cap. That's easier in the new Blender version. I think that's more at the top of the screen, but here you have to click matte cap, then this window opens up here, and when you click that you get a choice of matte caps here. So this is like the what's it called? This is like ZBrush here, and then you can have something shiny. Also not bad, must say, for a real-time engine. You can get something like a gold shader here, so it's also very cool. Sometimes it's nice while you're modeling to visualize something in different materials, and they're not 100% accurate, but they're certainly going to show inconsistencies in the mesh that you may want to work on, so that's kind of nice. There's other things here. You can add ambient occlusion, for example. If you do that, then you get kind of a fake shadow rendered in here. And all of that is sometimes nice when you're modeling. It just gives it that little extra kind of realism while you're doing stuff. It does come at the expense of some render time, so I don't notice anything right now, but it does happen. So yeah, alien stuff here, lots to play around with. I'm going to go switch this back off. I'm going to go leave it like this, and I will apply these modifiers. Now actually I'm going to save the file first. Let's go do that. Save as, and I may just go and do that on my desktop, perhaps. Desktop, where all the funky stuff goes. Let's call that Shatter cast, and in here I'm going to go and call that logo 1. And go save that Blender file before I do anything to it. That's another thing, saving in Blender, very exciting stuff. If you wanted to save versions, so if I'm thinking now to apply this modifier, those changes will be kind of burned in, and they're not going to, it's not going to go back from that. Once I turn this, once I apply the Solidify Modifier, and once I make the text in fact into a proper 3D object, then that's kind of burned in. So I can save versions easily by going over to Save As. And then in here, so mine's now called logo 1. I've got at the top right, I've got these two buttons here, plus and minus. So if I press plus, then it just adds a number to my file name. So I'm going to go and do that now. Plus means it's now called logo 2. And if I go and do that again, it's now called logo 3, and so forth. So I can do that with the plus and minus keys as well. Minus works just as well. I can do minus, and then it'll go back to the previous number. And that is how I can easily save incremental versions of my work. So in case I need to go back to this, and maybe I've done a lot of work, and I'm thinking actually I'm not quite happy with that, I've got a way to go back there. So that's another little Blender tip that I thought was very handy. So let's see how we can apply that modifier. Actually, I can't apply that modifier. I need to turn this mesh into a 3D object first before I can do that. Let me do that. I think that was Alt-C. Yes, Alt-C. It's a different menu in Blender 2.8, but in 2.79 and before, it's Alt-C to bring this thing up called curve from mesh text, or mesh from curve text. So that's what we want. We want to create a mesh. So select the object that you want to convert. Alt-C will bring that menu up, and then you select the second option, which is that. And then the modifier has gone away. That's because it's now already applied this into a proper 3D object. So we can see that the text option has gone away. If I now go into edit mode, I can actually, you look at my ugly geometry again, but I can't edit the text again. So that's cool. Let's do that with all the other items as well. So Alt-C, Alt-C, and Alt-C. That's it. So that applied the modifiers already. And now we have ugly geometry. And to combat this, I'm now going to go and use that Remesh modifier, just like I showed you in the cube thing. I'm going to select the 3D here and add the Remesh modifier. That's this one. And that has several options, one of which the default kind of makes it look like less resolution. And in order for that to work properly, we'll see that on the other letters there in a moment. I'm going to have to go and deselect, remove disconnected pieces. Because if I don't do that, then I'll only ever see one part of the object and others are being discarded. So that's one thing that I need to do. And the other thing is the octree depth here. And that's more or less something that'll add resolution to your mesh, which is cool. So you can do that in steps. One step will quadruple the geometry that's inherent to your object. So this has now made that a lot smoother here. So if I go back one step, you can see the difference there. If I even go back one step, then this is kind of introducing terrible artifacts. But if I go up and perhaps up one more time, then I get nice smooth edges. So perhaps 6 is probably what I'm gonna use there. I'll use 6 on the other ones as well. So once again, I'm going to go over to this guy, add a Remesh modifier. And this is where you can see that what this remove disconnected pieces does. If I enable that, then the rest of the disconnected pieces will literally just will be removed from the object. So untick that, and then that comes back, increase the resolution a little bit. Was it 6? It was 6, wasn't it? Yeah, 6, perfect. Great, that's all we need. So next one. I'm treating these individually because I want to apply shaders to that in a minute as well, so that they get a bit of color. Boom, there we go. That's that. We do get some artifacts here on the A. Don't know if a higher resolution will get rid of that. It does. Okay, maybe let's use 7. Great, let's do that. Computer isn't doing anything else at the moment. Let's go and get as high resolution as we possibly can. There was another question I received this week from Bradford Knight. In case you're watching, Bradford, hello, how you doing? Bradford's at work right now, so he can't join us in the chat, which is a shame. But he's probably going to watch the stream later. And he says, hey, with 2 RTX cards, how's this going to work in DAZ Studio? Does this mean you can have a larger scene, and does it render does it fill across cards, or how does it work? And it's a very good question. I don't think it'll work that way because I've read on the Blender website they had a similar issue. If you have more than one graphics card, the scene needs to fit into each graphics card, and then they can do their thing. So the Blender folks are thinking that very, very large scene, they'll never fit into GPUs, and regular computer memory, computer RAM is just much more available than GPU RAM for the foreseeable future anyway. So they're thinking of tweaking something in Blender that makes it possible to use chunks out of your scene. So rather than send the whole scene into the GPU, have the whole scene render, the Blender folks want to do something in which they send smaller chunks to the graphics card, render that chunk, and then send the card another chunk. And they said it's very ambitious, but it's very, very difficult to implement. But it is somewhere on the roadmap, so something like that is coming. But I don't think iRay works like that. But they want to make cycles work like that. So there we go. Okay, that's it really on this thing. Oh, I need to apply these things. Let me apply all these Remesh modifiers. So just to have a look here, this is what the oops, this doesn't work. Let me just apply one guy here. Oh, in fact, no, actually, let me just go and show you the wireframe of 2 of these things before I apply that. That's always nice to look at. That's on this little cube icon here. If you click that at the bottom, you get under display options, in case this is closed here. Under display options, there's this little thing called wire. And if you select that, then you'll see the now proper geometry that if I go into edit mode, I can now go and edit all these pieces. And it's dense, but I want to shatter it into 1,000 pieces, so that's why I'm doing it. That's why I'm doing it. I can go and untick that. Just wanted to show you that that's how dense the geometry is. I'm going to go and apply all the other modifiers as well. just hit the apply button here. That's all you need to do. Then the modifier is going away, and the object, anything that you've done here that's done non-destructively, is being applied. It's a bit like rasterizing a layer in Photoshop. If you've got smart filters on there and you go and rasterize the layer, whatever you apply isn't gonna come back. So it's always good to make a duplicate of that. With my modifiers, before I do anything else, I think I'm going to go and save my scene again. File, save as, and now I'm just going to go hit the, I'll try the plus key out. I think it works. Because it doesn't. It never does it? Plus key? No, see, plus key doesn't work. Oh, maybe it's a num key. Numpad plus key. Numpad plus key and minus key. That's what that is. Okay, cool. So numpad plus key increments this number. Enter will save your scene. So there we go. Let's create a plane to have a bit of floor here, and then we'll set some lights and have a look at what this object looks like, and then we're going to apply some colors and some shaders to it. So mesh plane, and let's go scale this up. Large, rather large, there we go. Cool, now we have a ground. Blender conference, oh wow, when is it? That's in Amsterdam, right? I believe it's in Amsterdam. It would be in Amsterdam, I guess. All the Blender Institute is in Amsterdam, so I wonder if it's when it is. I have, Blender comes with a default camera, default cube, and also a default light source. This is the light source here, and that over here is the camera. I guess with the camera, let's go and frame this object up quickly so that we can see what that looks like when it's lit. So in order to do that in Blender, it's usually the num key and 0 lets us look through the camera. And I haven't framed the camera up. It's basically just pointing at whatever it was pointing. If I do that, I get to see this aspect frame around here. As soon as I move my viewport again, that disappears and I'm moving away from the camera. So once again, when I want to look through it, just the numpad 0 key will take care of that. But how do I frame up my object so that the camera moves with it? How do I do that? Well, the secret sauce is something called lock to view, and it can be found in this tool shelf on the right hand side here. You open that with N, and there's this thing under the camera here, this thing here, and that's called this is the view, under the view menu here. Some of these things are a little bit cumbersome to understand. Again, if you're going to learn Blender, go for version 2.80 and onwards, and the interface will be slightly different, but the principles remain. So lock camera to view, if you tick that, then you see that the aspect frame gets this orange little border around it, and when that is happening, I can now go and move my object around or circle around my scene here, and that will now also move the camera. So whenever this thing is orange, it's kind of like a live on air type sign. So I'm going to go move in there a little bit and just frame that up like that. There, just for now. So if you untick this lock camera to view, orange border goes away, and I can go and use my director's view again, or like the perspective view as we know it from DAZ Studio. And then if you want to look through the camera, just hit the 0 button again, and then you're back to see what this looks like. So the other thing I love about Blender is that you can switch this viewport over to the rendered view, and we do that down here. That's this thing in Blender 2.79. Method to display shade objects in 3D view. So currently we're using this one, that's the solid view, and this one is the rendered view. There's also the material and the texture view. It's always a little bit complicated. I don't know which one is which. Material is that lets you view the object with a defined material, but not necessarily with a shader, with a texture on it. I don't know. Rendered is much like the iRay view in DAZ Studio. It'll physically render the scene and show you this. And that's funky because now if you wander around the scene, you get these little pixelations. That's Blender trying to work out the next sort of shading bits and bobs. Light is harsh, and we're going to go change that in a minute. You can also create separate viewports and have one shaded, one non-shaded, or one, you know, one preview, one non-preview. I think we're not going to worry about that here. I'm going to go and switch between these two things. There's a shortcut key as well that you can switch between these. So I believe Z is the one that is rendered, and solid is the one that I don't actually know. Z goes, no, see, Z is actually, why is that saying Z? Shortcut Z, so it doesn't really do what I expected it to do. Hey, one of those things, let's just switch it manually. If you do know the shortcut, please let me know. And thank you for the link for the Blender conference. Are you going, Christina? Because that would be really exciting. You get to meet Ton Rosendahl. Say hello from me. I can't meet him myself. So this is our light source here. Select the light, and then we're going to go and move it over to here somewhere. I'm going to go and leave it in its height. Actually, I'm going to bring this down a little bit, and then I'm going to go and press G followed by Shift Z, so that will leave it at the same height that I've got there and only moves it perpendicular to our ground plane. I think I'm going to go and position it somewhere here. Maybe I'll bring it down even further. It's just so that I can see it. And now I can go and rotate it so that it doesn't shine right onto the ground. It'll shine more towards the object. And I can do this manually. If I just go and hit R, then I get to kind of, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's better to do this with exact values. So in my case, I'm going to go R, Y, 45, enter. It hasn't actually done anything. That's terrible. That's because I've forgotten to dedicate this as a correct light source. So one thing in Blender is that you can, once you have a light in your scene, you can decide what it shall be. So in Dash Studio, you have to create a light, and that'll remain that light forever. So a spotlight will always be a spotlight. But in Blender, you can start as a spotlight and then turn it into an area light, or you can turn a point light into a spotlight, and so forth. And that is what we haven't done yet. That's why I can't rotate this. It's probably because it doesn't have a rotation to it. So once again, the light is up here. That's the ones with the light selected. You can go to the light panel up here. And then if you click that, then it has, you know, the lamp thing. And like I had suspected, it is actually a point light right here. So that is not something I can rotate because it shines in all directions. That's kind of the main difference between all these lights. Point light is literally just one pixel that radiates lights into all directions, like a light bulb. Then a sunlight, that's Dash Studio calls that a distant light. That is something that doesn't have a location, it only has a direction. It doesn't matter where you put it in your viewport, it only ever has, it doesn't matter if I put it higher or lower, it always just emits parallel light in one direction. Then a spotlight has all these things like fall-offs, and it also has a direction and so forth. A hemi-light is more or less like a hemi-light is very similar to an area light. I haven't figured out the difference between those two things, but they both have a location and a direction. Whereas the spotlight also has a fall-off on the outsides. It kind of gets dimmer towards the outsides, and it lets you adjust the cone as to where you'd like that light to point. But in my case, I think I'm going to use a sunlight. So I can just click sun here, and then I get this orange spike here, which is now the direction of the light. So let me just go press R and then direct that kind of at my object, like so. That should look okay. If we just look through the camera for a second and then switch this over to the rendered viewport, we can see, yeah, okay, it's kind of getting there. It's not great, but none of it has materials applied, and the shadows are very, very harsh. So it's one of those things. We can change the properties of the light, and perhaps we will actually make this into an area light rather than with these harsh shadows. So let me do that. Let me go and click area instead, and that'll change the light that we've got here quite dramatically. Or should I use hemi light? I don't really know. I don't really know what to use. Area. I will use an area light. and I will go and close shadow down. Under area shape, I can tell it if I want it to be a square or rectangle. I'm going to choose a square and then increase the size. So the reason why we get harsh shadows here now is because the size of that light source isn't particularly big. So I'm going to go and make that a bit bigger. Perhaps try 1. Doesn't work at all. Okay, let's try 10. I'd love to see something happening to my shadows here. How about 100? Now it just gets dimmer now, but the shadows are still very, very harsh. I don't really know why. Ton is a nice guy. Yes, have you met Ton in person? That'd be so cool. I'd love to meet Ton in person. He was very kind to me when I joined the Blender Cloud. I tweeted that, and he was very kind and got back to me and wanted to know what made me do that. So very interesting. I'm just going to go play around with the light until it's a little bit more to my liking here. I don't really like the light right now, but that's maybe because we don't have materials defined there. Or maybe spotlight. Spotlight's quite nice.
Are you still putting your fog on?
No, I didn't think I was.
Well, you were earlier when you were full screen.
That's right, yeah. Julia was just asking, am I putting my fog on still? But I think right now, I don't think I'm foggy. I'm just fuzzy, because I think here my OBS is telling me sometimes it can't put the data through. I don't really know why. Let's, considering the time, let me just go and speed this up a little bit. Let's not worry about light. Let's worry about some materials, and then we're going to go and see how we can, in fact, shatter the logo and create that animation there. So, in order to add materials, I'm going to go and select one of these objects and have a look at this little guy up here, which is the materials button. It's not foggy, thanks. And that'll give me all the materials that we currently have in our scene, which is none of them. Well, actually there's one, which is like the default material. But let's create a new one. This is something I found a little bit confusing in Blender, that you can create a material slot and a material. And the difference, I guess, is that a material slot is like a material zone, and then the actual material is what goes into that zone. So like on a piece of clothing, you could have a collar, and you could have cloth, and you could have a belt, and you could have a button, and all those would be material slots according to Blender. And then the actual materials would be different on the button, on the cloth, on the belt, and so forth. So that's why we have two. You can either click this button, create a slot, and not create a material for it, and then click this button and create a material for it, and then just go call that something like I'm going to call it blue. And then both of these things change, because right now they're kind of mutually inclusive, I guess. But you could also just click that big button on another object. So like if I go over here to the she now, and I go and just click this new button, then it creates both a slot and a material at the same time. I've just realized I'm in Blender render. That's why my lights weren't responding the way I wanted them to. So I'm just going to go switch this over to the Cycles render engine, and then perhaps we can go and create proper materials here. So 3D, I'm going to make that blue, and in this case I'm going to say keep it simple and just not use nodes, and just go and pick myself a color here, make it slightly blue like this ish. Yeah, nodes, perhaps we're going to leave that for another time, otherwise we're never going to get finished here, and I don't know when my computer is going to blow up. So there we go. That's blue. Let's select this one and call that green perhaps. And once again, you can just go and click that color here. This is not going to create a phenomenal material. It's just going to create one diffuse shader, so there's no shine to it. If we wanted to do that, we'd have to use nodes and then add a mix shader in front of, mix the diffuse together with a glossy node, and then let that go into the letter. So it's just going to look cheap and cheerful. It's more about the animation rather than about how to set up shaders here. Let's create another one. That's red, maybe pink. Let's go pink. and pink, purple, something along those lines. What do we think? Oh man, that's not pink at all, is it? It's quite interesting. Why isn't that pink? Answers on a postcard. Oh, because I said use nodes. Ah, you see, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, no problem. Let's go and delete pink and go create a new. Oh, now I'm using nodes. It's going down. Do we have to get into nodes? That's terrible. Ah, interesting. Okay, well, maybe we will get into nodes then. We've got pink 001 and pink 1. Oh, that's terrible. Okay, we have to deal with nodes. I don't know how to get back from this. And let's call that's the other thing that I said, pink 001. Let's call that yellow, and just go and the principal shader. Yes, I'd love to do that. How do I do that? Because these are principal shaders, aren't they? I don't know how I selected that as a principal shader and this as a non-principal shader. How did I even do that? That's crazy. I hate it when things like that happen. I'm gonna go make that yellow, add yellow to that. Click on diffuse, diffuse, yeah, but this is diffuse, isn't it? Yeah, see, this is what I don't quite understand, because I think these guys, they don't use nodes, which is kind of what I want. Maybe I'll have to use nodes. I don't know. I'll just go use nodes. That's cool. I'll use nodes. I'll just open another viewport up here, and that'll be my nodes thing. To principal. Oh, okay. Hang on. Let me just get rid of some of those viewports here. Change it to principal. Where do I do that? On surface. Principled. Oh my god, that's even worse, Christina. That's terrible. And maybe I'm not in the right. Me too. Let's go. Tell you what. Let's just use nodes. It's all cool. Let's go back to diffuse. Let's open another viewport here, and make that our nodes viewport. Let's quickly go press T and N to get rid of these windows at the bottom left and right there, and change this into a quick node editor. They're not bad. Nodes are good. Nodes are good for us. There. So this is pink, I guess, and this is how we just quickly define that pink. And that is also not reflected in my scene. Why is that, I wonder? That's really terrible. I wish I understood better, you know. Is this because we can only see it in the rendered version? Yes, look at that. So in the rendered version, it looks like we can now see these things that I've applied. Perfect. That's all we needed to know. Let's go and get rid of some of these viewports here. There, forget nodes, everything's fine. Let's worry one last time about light, because you know my light wasn't working the way I wanted it to work. I'll select it up here, and then I'll go into an area light, and that gives me some softer shadows now. That's very nice. Let's use nodes on the lights as well, and the strength we can just increase. I'll try 1000. It's maybe a little bit bright here. Let's try 500 perhaps. Yeah, or 600. Something like that. Perfect. So now we have a cycled rendered version here. That's much better. That's much better. Okay, cool. So this is our logo, and the only thing that's now also yellow is the ground. It doesn't actually look that bad with the yellow ground. What do you think? Arnold. What is Arnold? I've never heard of Arnold, Christina. That's interesting. See if we just put that material back, and it makes it a little bit less colorful there. So okay, cool. So we have colors in the scene. We have an object in the scene. Let's go and shatter this thing and see what that looks like. I'll go back to the regular solid viewport in which we can see two colors instead of the others. I think it's the viewport color. There's another thing, preview color. I can set, can't I? Okay, must not get distracted. Very important, must not get distracted. Let's shatter these objects, shall we? There. So let's start with the 3. I'm going to go and select it and click on cell fracture. Just move it over here so that we can see this being shattered as well as the other letters here. So I think I'm going to go and turn the source limit to 200. And I'm also going to show you how I'm going to try and add these cracks into the center there. I'm going to just use the ground shader that we have here, which is called the default shader right now. Perhaps we should actually do something about that. So it's just called material there. So we can call it floor shader. Floor. In fact, let's just make, yeah, let's just leave that. Here's the thing that I've found out how to assign the cracks there. These are all the materials that we have, and they're not alphabetically ordered. Or are they? I can't tell. This here, the floor shader, is the one I'd like to use for the cracks. And this is now material ID number 1, I think. Starts at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that's how it works. So this is now material ID number 1. And so that is what I need to give that cell fracture thing. So if I select my object, hit cell fracture here, I can go and first of all select 200 pieces here, and then I go under material and just select 1. I think that's how it works. We'll find out. I'll click OK, and let's turn that 3 around. Now what I haven't done, I've just noticed, is of course save my scene. So if now the computer crashes, let's hope it doesn't do that, it'll be painful, because all our hard work will be, gone. So what is Arnold then, Christina? Is Arnold kind of a plugin for Blender, or is it something that is Blender unrelated? It does ring a bell, but I can't say I've ever heard of it, other than by name. Okay, we're in luck that the computer did not crash, and I now have, on layer 2, I have my self-fractured, slightly broken at the back word 3D, so that's good. I think, learning from our mistakes, let's just quickly go and save that thing as logo 3, and then move on and shatter all the other pieces here. So let's shatter she, or should it be her? Very funny. So let's go source limit 200. It remembers, that's cool. So we just go click return. It takes a little bit longer because the pieces that it creates are more, and our geometry is higher. So that's why the calculation just takes a little bit longer. Oh, I see. So is Arnold something a bit like Octane then? Is that how I need to think about it? You can have a front end, and Arnold kind of integrates with, it's just a render engine into which you pass any data from any 3D program that supports it. Is that how it works? Let's go shatter this as well. I don't know why it looks black right now. It's sometimes it's really nice to go and see the Voronoi block being built around it. I don't know why it does that right now. Oh, cool. Well, how much is Arnold from the top of your head? That may vary depending on the 3D package, of course. Because like you can get Octane for Carrara, and even though the Carrara interface is kind of a little bit retro, it's just a front end to position your objects and add the things that you need, like multipliers and all that sort of thing. And then the shaders are being set up with Octane. So it's a great idea for companies like that to hook into interfaces that you already know, and then basically get another customer depending on whatever front end they know already. So that's kind of cool. Right, yeah, I understand, yeah. Okay, so looks like we have on layer 2, we now have shattered pieces. Very cool. Let's see what they look like when we simulate them. For that, we need to have a floor again. And before, I believe I've used all these shards and brought them onto the first layer, but because these are now so many objects, it's actually cheaper and easier for me to bring in the plane, the camera, and the light over into this layer. So let's do that. On the first layer, we're going to go select the ground and hit M and followed by 2. That'll move the ground to the second layer. Then we go and select the camera, this is the camera, hit M followed by 2, that moves that to the next layer. And we're also going to use the light here, click the light, M2, moves to the second layer, perfect. Now we select the second layer, and that's where we've got all these cracky little things here. Very cool. Let's save the scene one more time, because before we do anything else, hover plus return. And now, before we do anything, let's have a look at the rendered version. We can see nice cracks here. That's cool. Let's go back into the solid viewport and see if we can go and switch over to the Blender game mode now. Viewport changes just a little bit. Press the letter P and enjoy. Maybe I'll go zoom out a little bit. Let's go not look through the camera again. Press P and hope for the best. It looks like it's shattered everything except for the letter A. The letter A seems to still be in one piece. I don't really know why that happened, but it's certainly very funny. Very cool. So with escape, we go back to this and make sure we go and record the animation up here. Very important to record that. And once we've done that, we could define a slightly longer piece here. So if we go right now, we're ending at frame 250. I think if we just go and increase that a little bit, then let's just go over here and end, let's say end 500. It'd be 500 frames in the animation. There, let's do that. And with game still enabled, with the animation being recorded, let's go and hit P and marvel. Oh my goodness, 1,200 euros for Arnold. Wow, that's amazing. I guess, yeah, this is just what these things cost. I mean, they're good programs, they're good render engines. I've been playing with Eevee in Blender 2.8, and that is something I'm really interested in. We can, once I save this scene with the animation here, I can go and switch over to Blender 2.8 and see if everything comes back, and we'll see if we can render this with the 2 RTX cards, perhaps, see what happens. And see the pieces are still settling down here, so you can literally give it as many frames as you want, and then just wait a moment, because this is not real time. The physics engine is kind of calculating this in the background. And what I liked about Eevee is the fact that so Eevee is supposed to be a real-time rendering engine that is cycles compatible to a certain point. So most of the cycles shaders and the cycles lights and all that behavior, Eevee understands. So I don't really know how they've done that. I think there's kind of a translation process going on, because Eevee is not cycles, it's a different render engine. But they want to use that as the render engine for the viewport. So currently you can, like what we've just done, we've got this render engine here. I'm gonna go hit escape. That should have recorded our animation. We've got this viewport here, which is the solid viewport. We've got texture and material. Cycles is currently missing because we're in Blender game. And as soon as we switch that over, let me just do that, switch over to cycles. Now we have the rendered version. But if we were in Eevee, then Eevee would work with the similar defined things, but it would work much faster. And let's look at that in Blender 2.8 in a moment there. Right now, if I go look through my camera, I can go and animate through this pile of rubble. It's very cool. And I can render any of these images that I want. Perhaps I'm going to go just take a look at this. I want to know if the cracked material has been applied properly, and it looks like it hasn't done that. So maybe I've just chose the wrong material ID there. That's possible. I find that quite charming that the A is kind of the only thing that's left there. It's almost like what Biscuits was asking earlier. Can you have one item that is untouched? And I guess this is it. So there we go. Okay, I think I'm going to go save my file here. Logo 5. And now let's just go and perhaps minimize this blender and open the other blender and see if that whole scene opens up in Blender 2.8. So see what we learn, shall we? I have rendered my animation that I've shown you in the beginning. I've rendered that in Blender 2.8. It took about, it was 2,000 frames in total, and it was, I did that in about 8 hours with the two cards, with what's it called? Once I find Shatter cards, there we go, Logo 5. With cycles. Yeah, so it took about 8 hours with the two cards. And in 1080 by 1920. 1920 by 1080, my goodness. So there we go. This is the same position that I had there. I can play this back from the beginning to the end. Oh, it looks like the A is actually, it's still there because that was a disconnected piece. I can see a bit of Z fighting going on, Z fighting going on here, and it looks like we have a separate A. So one's shattered and the other one is still in our scene. I don't know why that's a separate object. Interesting. I'm going to leave it. That's cool. Oh my God, $600 a year. Wow. I'd love to know more about Arnold. If you have time, if ever any of us had time, make a quick tutorial, just a little overview of what it can do and all. That'd be quite nice. Of just see Arnold in action. So Blender 2.8, yes, we can still use the N and the T keys to make these things disappear. This up here, and the N is this shelf here. Some of these options have stayed the same, including the lock camera to view that we saw earlier. But yeah, let's just have a look at what this looks like rendered now. If I switch over to the rendered viewport, which I can't quite remember where that is. I think it's at the bottom right here. There we go. Method to display, shade objects, render. Let's try that. Okay, this is cycle now. CPU cycling, CPU rendering in the viewport. But if we want to render this for good with the GPUs, we'd have to use F12. That is still the same. I think you can also choose that from the render menu. They now have a render menu here that lets you render the image or the animation. So that's very nice. And let's just try that out under render settings. I just wanted to check the device CPU. We can change that over to GPU compute and hope this thing doesn't crash, of course. And the size here is 50% of 1920 by 1080. Okay, let's do this thing. If the stream stops working, then something with the cards went wrong. Let's try it anyway. Oh, I see. So F12 also activates this magnifying key from my cursor highlighting software. That is not good. Let me just press that again and then it'll go away. Nice. And this is with how many samples? Whoops, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't show you the render. That's okay. Let me try again. There we go. It's my magnifying glass coming on here. So I have to press it again to switch that off. I should really have a look into that modifier key there. So let's see how many samples that is with. Render 128. So I thought I'm going to use a few more, perhaps, I don't know, 500. And then the other thing you can do in Blender 2.8 is, I've forgotten where that is now, is a denoiser. It has a denoiser. Is it in post-processing? Where's that denoiser again? Oh, there we go. It's under this thing here, the view layer. There's denoising. And that'll do the same denoising as I think is built into the RTX card. So that you can switch that on here and it'll do that tile by tile. So if I go to render image, then you'll see at the top here that some tiles have rendered and others have been denoised. So it doesn't happen at the same time. First the tile is rendered and then it takes a moment and then it's being denoised. So very cool results that we can get there. And if you want to get out of the rendered viewport, you just press escape and then you pick a different image, like, I don't know, like this one, for example. Let's try that. See what the shattered pieces look like. So yes, that is in essence how the shattering process works. So then the next thing I did was animate two cameras. One I left in place and the other one I just animated around it, just with keyframes. Keyframes, that's another thing I think I'm going to do, and perhaps cover that in another video, how to do animations or small animations in Blender. I think the only other thing in 2.8 I wanted to show you is this Eevee rendering engine. And I don't quite remember how to use it now, but I think if we go back to the bottom here, I think that's how you do it. Oh, this is where you find the matte caps, by the way. If you wanted to change that into matte caps, this is where that is, this little icon here. I think we use the rendered viewport for that, but we also need to select the render engine somehow, somewhere. And I don't really remember where that is. Somewhere here, perhaps? There we go, render engine, there it is, found it. Cycles or Eevee. There we go. So I can, and workbench. So that's workbench is now this I think that we're looking at. But if I switch this to Eevee over here and then switch this to the rendered viewport, then it takes a moment and it looks like the cycles materials that I've set up are being acknowledged. The only thing that isn't quite working is the light. So from what I understand, I need a different light intensity for now for Eevee than I need for cycles. But that's easily taken care of, I guess, because we will just need to select that select that lamp, and then we can go and head over to the object data, and power we can just crank up. So from 1, maybe I'll say 5 and see what happens. There we go. That's kind of cool. So what's interesting about Eevee is that the colors are exactly the same and the shadows are the same as well. So it's an approximation here, but there are certainly diffuse shadows, and it takes a fraction of the time to render this than it does with cycles. So granted, it's a little bit less realistic, but the cool thing about this is that it's, you know, it's very close to real-time previews. That's really fascinating about Eevee. So viewport performance as well. This is happening in real time. That's kind of cool. And you can now also, you can just go and render this whole animation out in Eevee, and then we should be able to see a preview of that. I think we can try it out. We can try it out and see maybe a start and end frame. I'll give it an end frame of maybe just 100, and then we can see what if we can render an animation with Eevee. So under output down here, I'm going to go set my output path. Whoa, that's exciting, isn't it? Let's go to my desktop and Shattercast. I'm going to go and add a folder here, Eevee. That's one E too many, isn't it? Eevee animation. Go in there and call it Eevee animation. Oh no, let's spell it properly. Let's spell it properly. Eevee animation. There we go. Hit accept. And let's see what happens if I head over to render animation. So it's not quite real time, but it's certainly very, very close. And these are now all the images rendered in Eevee. It's sometimes we don't get to see the preview, but it is certainly faster than Cycles. So Cycles still takes about 30 seconds for the full image at 50% resolution. I guess it's more like 5 or 6 or 10 seconds. But Eevee has got it down in about 1 second per frame, and that's quite funky. Yes, I like that about Octane as well, Rod, that it is perpetual. I think Phil Wilkes uses Octane with Carrara on his used to be on his laptop, and he's super happy with it. And it really, what I like about this approach is that you don't get dictated, hey, you need to learn a new interface so that you can use our rendering engine. You know, if you like cycles but you can't figure out how Blender works, then, you know, I like the idea that you separate that and that you say, give people a choice and say, look, use the interface that you're used to. Like in your case, Poser, for example, you're swimming in Poser. But if you don't quite like the rendering engine that Poser offers, you just go, hey, that's cool, I'm going to use LuxRender or Octane or whatever. And it's very cool that that is implemented that way. So rather than spend all the time and effort on integrating or on building a new front end, you think, screw the front end, man, somebody else has done a perfect job at that, I'm going to focus on the render engine. It's a very good approach. I like that. Look at that, I think we're done. That's very cool. So now we can go and have a look at all these images here in Shattercast. Eevee animation, there they all are. That is quite nice. And now we can go and assemble this again in Photoshop, like I showed you before. Well, that's very cool to be able to preview your animation with fairly good results, I must say. That's very exciting. I think, you know, I believe that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm so sorry about all these technical shenanigans at the beginning there. It's it's a shame that all this happened. I really don't know what's going on. It may be my hardware. I will continue to investigate. And as soon as I have a fit system, a fit and fat system, a new system is about this fat, this wide. As soon as I've figured all this out, I hope we're going to have a hitchless next live stream next Friday. Also, of course, join me again for a special episode of Subnautica Saturday tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday for Subnautica Saturday. We're still, I seem to remember, we're still on the island, and on the island we have two peaks. And so I'm going to call that episode Twin Peaks. It'll be tomorrow at 4 p.m. and we're still on the island. We're going to move around there a little bit, explore stuff, and then we're going to go back and have a look at our base and see if we find enough copper, see if we can implement some Girls from TNA pictures in our base and some other goodies. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend ahead, and if I don't see you tomorrow, I will see you next Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.